Servus, Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. Today I just have to rant a little bit. It's gonna be one of those videos again where I will just talk about some general observations I made lately, but I will give you some examples from Germany too. I'm not talking only about the US midterm elections, obviously. I'm also talking about several things that went on in Berlin last year, over a year ago, during the elections there. It was also our federal parliament, the Bundestag, that was elected, and at the same time there were local elections and also some kind of a referendum about nationalizing real estate corporations in Berlin. So they were last September, I think, and last year in September there were a lot of elections on that day, and the Berlin Marathon to top it all off. But it was a crazy disaster. So it is not only the US, but what I really want to say is that elections, not democracy necessarily, I'm talking about right now. I'm specifically trying to talk today about the election process, the voting process, and of course the counting process also. And I talked about this at length during the time of the last election campaign in the US. I'm talking about 2020, of course, and I don't repeat all these points I have made. You can go back and watch my videos from 2 years ago. It's still all there, and I think it's still all, to a certain degree at least, it's still relevant. So let's start with the obvious observations, and that is that until very recently, it didn't take that long to count votes. I mean, that is, of course, the big elephant in the room. Why does it take so long? And they have all these pseudo explanations like, oh, there is mail-in voting and it is very complicated and there is a lot of pressure and they don't want to make any mistakes. Well, here in Europe and also in the US in the past, by the way, it never took that long. And here in Europe, in many countries, there are a lot of mail-in votes. But in Germany, and I talked about that 2 years ago, there is a proper registration process for that. So it is very easy, very smooth. And already, normally we vote on Sunday, and already at night we have pretty precise data already. It might not be the official end result, but it is very close to it and not a lot changes. Maybe the digit after the dot or after the comma, as we would say in Germany. And people told me, and this is also my experience generally, that in the US it wasn't much different until a couple of years ago. And just like last time, it is always these very chaotic and very diverse and very exotic and colorful districts where the race is really tight, and they always take forever, and it's very untransparent what is going on there and why they don't publish the numbers. It is almost like they have to look for ballots somewhere that they think they have seen, but they can't find them right now, but they're sure they're there, and once they find them, then the result will be completely different. So after everything that happened 2 years ago, why didn't they change or optimize the protocol that this doesn't happen a second time? But it's some of the same districts again. Arizona, for example, is notorious for this. And like the thumbnail of my video already shows to you, I don't think that this is an accident. I don't think that this is that they're incapable or ignorant or something. I think they know what they're doing, and it's kind of mocking us or the peasants. I mean, not us, because I don't live in the US, but you know what I'm saying, right? The tax cattle, the ordinary people who might or might not still believe in the democratic process and the election and that their vote counts. I think these globalist elites that are, of course, also organizing these elections and who are defining the processes and the procedures here, they are having a good old laugh about the common man. I think they are laughing their asses off right now, and they're just wondering how many times they can repeat this farce until someone does something. And by the way, I want to clarify something because some people apparently were under the impression after one of my last videos that I tried to promote not voting, or that I was saying that people shouldn't go vote or something. No, when did I ever say that? I never said that. I literally said also 2 years ago that, yeah, Trump is not perfect and he has a lot of flaws, but his policies and his track record so far show that even for Germany and for Europe, he is still the better alternative. And yeah, go vote if that's what you want. Perfect. I'm not telling you to vote. I'm not telling you not to vote. Me personally, I am voting here in Germany, even though, and I also reported about this in very much detail, there are, of course, some flaws and there is, of course, some foul play sometimes during German elections. That doesn't mean that it is pointless to go voting or that you legitimize the system of power and all that stuff. No, I want to briefly tell you that no, it doesn't legitimize anything and it doesn't take away your right to complain later on because, well, as I said many times, if you vote for the opposition party like the AfD in Germany and the AfD is very far away from any meaningful power, yeah, of course you can complain about the coalition or the governing parties because you didn't vote for them. And even if you voted for them and they do something else, then of course you can always complain because you know what? Nobody knows if you voted or who you voted for, so it doesn't make any difference. And also, I want to stress that no matter what the voter turnout is, there is no practical change. So if only 10% of the people vote, let's just say the politicians, their family, and the whole bureaucratic class, let's say 10 or 30% of the population, whatever, if only they are voting and all the others stay at home, still nothing changes. It only matters who wins the seat in parliament, and that determines then the ruling coalition and who is going to be chancellor and so on. There is no law that says, oh, at least 80% or 60% do have to vote. It doesn't change a thing. So staying at home doesn't change anything. So if you want to show your protest and that you're not on board with any of the policies of the major parties, then yeah, vote for a small independent party. If that doesn't exist, yeah, sure, then you can stay at home, but we have that in Germany here, and also in the US this exists. So, but now I also want to talk about Berlin. So, and by the way, so just because we have these problems also in Berlin, well, that doesn't mean that it's okay in the US, because being compared to Berlin is not a compliment. Berlin is not like the rest of Germany. In the rest of Germany, as far as I can tell, at least in my experience, in my little Bavarian small town, the election is facilitated in a very orderly, efficient, and legal fashion. I cannot complain about any wrongdoing here in my vicinity. But Berlin, that's a completely different case. So what we have there is that over a year ago, in September 2021, there were a lot of irregularities there. And as I said, there were many different kinds of votes or elections that were going on at the same time. We like to do that. We bundle things so that people only have to go to the voting center or to the voting booth once. So among the problems and the irregularities that occurred was, for example, that there were not enough ballot sheets, that some of those ballot sheets were mixed up and confused between districts even, I read, and then also people who are not of voting age yet were allowed to vote. Also, foreigners who have no right to vote in these elections were allowed to cast their votes. And then some of the booths and some of the voting centers, they closed early, or they closed during hours where they should be operational, and many people had to stand in line for many hours, and eventually they had to go home because they thought it would never open again. Then there was, of course, the usual, there were voter turnouts greater than 100% and so on and so forth. So it was a complete catastrophe, and until now it hasn't been repeated. And there is a court now involved that has to clear things up. And yeah, they say, well, the election is not really legal and it should be repeated, but we don't really have a clear date yet. And let's just say it's over a year now. The next election will be in 3 years. And if they wait any longer, they can just say, let's just keep those parliamentarians on their seats, let's just keep them in parliament, let's just wait for the next election and maybe then we do it correctly. And this kind of attitude is so typical for Berlin, to just sit things out, or etwas aussitzen, how we say in German. That means just ignoring the problem and waiting until it dissolves, or it solves itself, or nobody complains anymore or something. This is really, really German, or well, sometimes we do that, and this is typical for Berlin in this case. And the other incompetence, well, as I said, it goes beyond incompetence. It could be incompetence if it was happening a couple of times, but it's really systematic, and it is to a point where you see not only is it incompetent, there are never any consequences. That means they know that they're allowed to act this way and nothing happens. And by now, as I said, I'm sure that they're laughing about people, that they're joking about it, and that they know full well that they can do these things and get away with it. And they couldn't show disrespect for German families, the German working class, for the taxpayers. They couldn't show their disrespect any clearer. So just to let you know, Berlin, which is for a very long time ruled now by the Green Party, the Communist Party, and the Social Democrats, so very socialistic parties. It is exactly the same as in these very diverse parts of the US, these urban areas where repeatedly, time after time now, in recent years, we see these irregularities and this utter disrespect for the voting process and democracy itself, I might even say. And now, of course, they want to gaslight people into believing that it has always been this way. Of course, it has really some striking similarity with things that happened in the novel 1984, of course, where people are always gaslit into thinking that whatever weird thing is happening right now has always been that way. And of course, it goes without saying that not all areas in the US are like this. Florida is a very big state. It has rural areas. It also has urban areas. And they counted the votes very fast. And they had their results very fast. And now there are several states where we are still waiting. And this is just absolutely unacceptable. But, well, apparently people are accepting it. And as long as people are accepting it, they keep laughing about us. Servus, Kameraden.